Alright, so for the final few episodes of this series, the intro to traveling on points, we're going to be in advanced mode. We're going to start by talking about the more extreme side of redeeming your points. How can you use your frequent flyer miles and credit card points to take once-in-a-lifetime, crazy, unforgettable trips to some of your dream destinations around the world? And this isn't just hyperbole, but it genuinely boggles the mind some of the crazy trips that you're able to accomplish using points that you would never be able to book using cash alone. And for me personally, it's sort of what attracts me the most to traveling on points. It's what makes the game worth playing for me. And in this episode, I'm going to show you what it's all about. Now, the archetypal example of one of these extreme award redemptions, and what we're going to focus on in this episode, is what's known as an Aeroplan Mini-RTW. Now, we had briefly touched upon the Aeroplan Mini-RTW in one of the previous episodes, and you could fly the whole way in the economy class, business class, or first class, depending on how many miles you have. Trips like these are known as mini-round-the-world trips, and they're a great way to get fantastic value for your Aeroplan miles. But there's a whole lot more that we can talk about here. So in this episode, we're going to go over the rules and intricacies surrounding the Aeroplan Mini-RTW. We're going to talk about the procedure for booking one, and I'm going to show you lots and lots of sample trips just to show you the extent of what's possible. Let's start with the basics. Now, you might recall from previous episodes that whenever you book an Aeroplan round-trip flight, you're allowed to have 2 stopovers along the way at no additional cost. And that means you can stop somewhere in the middle for an extended duration of a few weeks or a few months, and then continue on to your final destination, and you'd pay the same price as if you had just booked a simple round trip. So that's the basic idea of the Aeroplan Mini-RTW. 2 free stopovers in addition to your final destination. Now, on top of this basic allowance of 2 free stopovers, there are a few more rules and definitions for us to go over. The first is known as an open jaw. This term refers to a ticket or itinerary in which you fly into one airport and then you fly out of a different airport in a different place onto your next destination. And you're supposed to make your own way between the 2 airports. And it's called an open jaw because when you look at it on a map, it kind of looks like an open jaw. So as part of the rules for the Mini-RTW, you can substitute one of your 2 stopovers for an open jaw instead. So you're either allowed to have 2 stopovers in addition to your destination, or you can have 1 stopover and 1 open jaw in addition to your destination. The next key definition for us is layovers. Now, in everyday language, layover and stopover kind of mean the same thing, but here in the Aeroplan Mini-RTW, they have very different meanings. A stopover refers to a stop of longer than 24 hours in duration, whereas a layover refers to a stop in a certain place of less than but up to 24 hours in duration. And these layovers of up to 24 hours is another part of what makes the Aeroplan Mini-RTW such an exciting opportunity for those of us who love traveling. Because in addition to our 3 stops in 3 different places around the world, 2 stopovers and 1 final destination, we also get to build in many long layovers in various cities along the way. And don't get me wrong, 24 hours is not a lot of time at all, and certainly not enough time to fully explore a place. But it certainly makes for a fun, exciting adventure and lets you see some new places, catch a glimpse of them, and decide if you want to go back in the future. So overall, if you have many stopovers and many long layovers, it's going to be kind of a tiring journey, but if you're willing to lose a bit of sleep in order to see more of the world, then you can imagine how powerful the Aeroplan Mini-RTW could be. And lastly, we should talk about something called the maximum permitted mileage. Now, we're getting very technical, very advanced here, but I'll try to sum it up in a nutshell as best as I can. Basically, Aeroplan is affiliated with Air Canada, which is part of the Star Alliance, a global network of 28 member airlines. And so when you're redeeming your Aeroplan miles, you can choose to fly with any of these 28 airlines on one of their routes. Now, Aeroplan lets you customize your routing to a pretty high degree. So let's say you're trying to fly from Toronto to Budapest. You could fly direct with Air Canada, or you could choose to fly with Brussels Airlines through Brussels, or TAP Air Portugal through Lisbon, or LOT Polish Airlines through Warsaw, or any number of other possibilities. The maximum permitted mileage, or MPM for short, is basically a rule that's supposed to limit how far you can fly between two cities, how convoluted your routing may be. Aeroplan has assigned to every pair of cities around the world a certain maximum permitted mileage figure, and while they don't publish that figure publicly, there is a way to figure it out, and I'll link to that technique in the description below. Now, to be honest, if you're trying to book a relatively simple 3-stop trip around the world, you probably won't really have to worry about the maximum permitted mileage. It's really when you start trying to maximize the value of your miles by taking your Aeroplan miles and trying to visit as many far-flung places around the world as possible that you're going to have to pay attention to the MPM. What the fuck? How many times have you tried to redeem your Aeroplan miles and been hit with $1,000 in fuel surcharges? Isn't that almost kind of insulting? You're finally about to redeem your hard-earned miles for a trip around the world, and they have the nerve to ask for another huge sum of money? In fact, fuel surcharges are probably one of the most common complaints among Aeroplan users. But if you're a savvy Aeroplan member, you know that there's a way to get around them. Only a handful of the 28 Star Alliance member airlines will pass on fuel surcharges on Aeroplan redemptions, while the vast majority of airlines do not have any fuel surcharges. So it's all about knowing which airlines to avoid and which airlines to seek out as you're trying to build your Aeroplan Mini around the world. And I'm just going to tell you straight up, avoid Air Canada, Lufthansa, and Austrian Airlines. As of right now, those 3 airlines are the biggest offenders when it comes to fuel surcharges, charging you $500 to $1,000 per ticket. There are a handful of other airlines such as Air China, ANA, LOT Polish Airlines that do have moderate fuel surcharges, about $100 or $150 per direction. And if you really want to save money, you can try avoiding those airlines as well. But personally, I don't really begrudge a few $100s here or there if I'm already redeeming my miles for a business class ticket around the world for pennies on the dollar. And then there's the majority of Star Alliance airlines, including some of the world's best, like EVA Air or Singapore Airlines, which do not have any fuel surcharges at all. And these are the airlines that you should definitely be aiming for when you're trying to build your Aeroplan Mini around the world. If you fly with these airlines, you'll only have to pay the government-imposed taxes and airport improvement fees that come with your ticket, which shouldn't be very expensive at all, and you'll be treated to a world-class experience. Let's go through a few examples of trips that you can take with the Aeroplan Mini around the world. And none of these are hypothetical examples, they're all trips I've taken over the past few years. A few years ago, I needed to visit family back in China, so I decided to fly the long way around and spend a few days in Warsaw, Poland on the way. I flew from Toronto to Warsaw with Brussels Airlines business class through Brussels, and then I flew from Warsaw with Swiss business class to Hong Kong. From Hong Kong, I decided to travel my own way through China, so I booked an open job between Hong Kong and the city of Shenyang in northeastern China. From there, I resumed my journey to Taipei and then back to Toronto on EVA Air business class, which is one of the best business class experiences within all of Star Alliance. In this trip, I had one stopover in Warsaw, I had a destination of Hong Kong, and I had my open jaw between Hong Kong and Shenyang. And the whole thing cost me 150,000 miles in business class, plus about $200 in taxes and fees. And that's a pretty unbelievable deal. Then last year, I applied these same principles to a trip from Toronto down to South America. I flew down to Buenos Aires for a 5-day stay. From there, I went to Foz do Iguaçu to see the Iguaçu Falls on the border of Brazil and Argentina. So the Iguaçu Falls was my first stopover, and then my second stopover was in Rio de Janeiro, where I spent another 5 days. After Rio, I flew to Panama City, where I had a 16-hour layover, where I got to see the famous Panama Canal, and after that I flew to Mexico City for a 21-hour layover, where I got to eat an obscene amount of tacos. So on this trip, Buenos Aires was my destination, and then Foz do Iguaçu and Rio de Janeiro were my stopovers, and then I also built in long layovers in Panama City and Mexico City, and the whole thing cost me 110,000 miles in business class, plus about $150 in fees. Again, what a trip booked at such a steep discount. Now, earlier this year, I decided to take a trip that would stretch the Aeroplan Mini around the world to its most extreme limits. Like I mentioned in a previous video, in fact, I recently came back from a trip hitting up Ghana, Turkey, Australia, China, and the Federated States of Micronesia, all in one big trip for 160,000 miles in business class. In this trip, Perth, Australia was my destination, and on the way I had a stopover in Ghana as well as a stopover in Beijing on the way back. And on the way back from Beijing, I flew through the Micronesian islands and had a few long layovers on each island as well. So you've gotten a good idea of some of the crazy things you can accomplish with the Aeroplan Mini around the world. But we haven't yet talked about the exact process of booking a trip like this. Honestly, it's not an easy task. You gotta learn which Star Alliance airlines fly where, and then you gotta be able to piece together all the routes in a way that meets all the rules and requirements that we've discussed. And furthermore, you can't even book these trips online because the Aeroplan.com search engine can't handle such complex itineraries. You've got to call the call center and book it with an agent over the phone. So sometime down the road, I definitely intend to do a whole separate video about the booking process of searching for flights, putting together your route, and finding award availability on every flight to be able to book one of these trips for yourself. But until then, I hope you realize how incredibly powerful the Aeroplan Mini around the world is, and I highly recommend that you look into booking one for yourself because it makes for an unbelievably fun and memorable trip. And if you love traveling like I do, then I can't really think of many more satisfying experiences out there that you can book with your miles. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed to the Prince of Travel YouTube channel so that you don't miss any future content. Just click the subscribe button below the video. And hey, let me know in the comments if you've ever taken an Aeroplan Mini around the world. And if not, let me know which 3 places around the world you'd like to put together into one big awesome trip. Have fun planning your travels, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.